Today's critical infrastructure panel focuses on one sector that is vital to every other, to every mission of government, and every aspect of life for citizens in the United States and around the world. If the power goes out, everything stops, and everyone is in the dark. For moderated discussion of ensuring the dependable delivery of energy resources that are so vital to national security and economic viability of the United States and every nation, please welcome to the stage our plenary critical infrastructure keynote panel. Vice President and Chief Security Officer of the third largest energy provider in the United States, Dominion Energy, Adam Lee. Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Department of Energy, Rocky Campione. Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response for the Department of Energy, Sean Plankey. And discussion moderator, the Global Government Chief Technology Officer for Global Government at ServiceNow, Robert Bob Osborn.
Good morning. How's everyone doing this morning? Thanks for getting up and joining us this morning. This is great. Not a bad crowd at all. Please have a seat, guys. So, the past couple of days we've had a really great conference. I want to thank Don, Barry, Chrissy, and Charlie, the GBEF, for putting together CESG. What a great group of professionals coming together. I thought that the executive roundtables were super informative, as well as the plenary sessions yesterday. You know, critical infrastructure has been woven throughout the discussion over the past couple of days. And we've heard some very interesting things, but now, those of you who got up this morning to join us are going to hear the most important part of how we protect the critical infrastructure, because we're going to talk about energy. So, as of this year, there's going to be over 20 billion unique IP-connected devices on the internet. Each one of those creates a potential vector for a threat to cause havoc within some portion of the infrastructure. As that threat surface expands exponentially year over year, the challenge put before professionals, both the government and the private sector, delivering energy to us is ever more paramount to be dealt with. And if there's one thing that our society cannot do without, it's electricity. So think about it. Everything we do as a society relies upon electricity, from the water that we need to drink, to our gasoline we need to pump, to the facilities that we're in today. Electricity powers our society. Without it, we've got a real issue. So I'm really excited about this morning's panel. We've got some experts within the Department of Energy and within Dominion Power in Virginia to share with us how they're addressing the challenges from a policy perspective, an internal look to government facility security, an external look to policy in partnership with service delivery providers around the nation, and somebody who actually has to do that in the actual power delivery role. So with that, I'd like to get started. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me on the stage this morning. Adam, why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself, yourself, your role at Dominion Power, and some of the highlights of what you have going on in the organization.
Sure. So good morning, everybody. Great to be with you. So it's been an amazing transition for me, leaving a 22-year career in government with the FBI, moving into the private sector. I've worked in county government, state government in the state of California, and federal government for 2.5 decades. And my last private sector job was at Trader Joe's when I was in college out in San Francisco. So it's been an interesting and daunting transition. Cheating a little bit though, because the regulated environment of energy feels a lot like government. We are not a first to market company, we are a utility. But we're really more than a utility. We're the power company of the Pentagon. We're a power company to the 3-letter agencies. We're a power company to the Navy Yard, Quantico, the Loudoun County server farms. We're also, 7 nuclear reactors, a transmission business, a retail business, a gas business. We're in 18 states. And we are an exporter of energy. So we move natural gas and then we liquefy it and we export it, filling a tanker ship a week at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. So a big company, Fortune 200 company, very diverse in what it does, and an amazing risk profile from a security perspective.
Just a small portfolio.
Yeah. So, the geopolitical implications of exporting energy out of the United States animates our adversaries. The fact that we supply energy to our biggest players in the defense industrial base, to DoD, to the intelligence community, I think has a particular nuance in my work that may not be shared across the sector. But it's for us, we have a hawkish board when it comes to security. Blessed for that. In fact, I think part of my role at Dominion, which is the CSO role, has existed for as long as I've filled it, because it's a new position to Dominion. And when we lost, the last board member we lost was Bill Barr, and I think he was part of the thinking around how do we secure what we do for the U.S. government and the people and the nation. So very fortunate. Our governance structure really enables me. We've had a lot of conversations prior to sitting down here with you this morning about that, because that is such an essential piece of making your security organization within a large company like Dominion doing what Dominion does, how we fit into the company and how we're enabled by the company to do the things we need to do, which sometimes slows operations. Sometimes it costs money people don't want to spend. We don't produce any revenue for the company. We don't produce any value for the shareholders, but we do prevent things from happening that could have dramatic impacts on those things. So our folks find that compelling in their decision making and have really enabled us with resources and that putting us into that role within the company's governance that enables us to do the things we need to do.
Adam, that's really important, and I think the breadth of responsibilities is really impressive as well. You know, Rocky, when I was in energy at NNSA, there were a lot of concerns around different parts of the infrastructure and security for that. Your role now as CIO for all of DOE really encompasses even far more than I have the responsibility for. Tell us about what you're doing there.
Well, first, it's great to be here. Good morning, everybody. I want to start with a little bit, what is the Department of Energy? Many of you know we have nuclear weapons. You might be very familiar with that, Bob.
Yeah, my hair wasn't this color before I had that.
Yeah. We also have basic science research. We also do national security research. But what you might not know is the Department of Energy provides bulk power to 34 states across the United States of America through what we call the power marketing administrations. These include Bonneville Power, Western Area Power, Southwestern Area Power, and Southeastern Power. So WAPA, SWAPA, SEPA, and BPA. If we go into acronym jargon, I apologize. With that, so within the utility space, you have generation, transmission, and distribution. You can kind of classify those. But DOE plays a space within that transmission space. We take power generated by the Army Corps of Engineers, or BLM, and we move it from where it's generated to where the customers are. And most of that is across the Western United States. So when we talk about IT security, or actually OT security, we're not just talking about, or what I should say is, when we talk about how do we protect our critical infrastructure and our networks at the Department of Energy internally, we're not just talking IT, we're talking OT. The Office of Electricity manages the PMAs. As a CIO, we develop policy and we provide assistance. And I think we'll talk about a little bit later how Sean's organization and my organization work together to do reporting and infrastructure across both. So it does keep us up at night, right? It's something that's critical. I think you mentioned earlier, if you don't have electricity, you don't have anything else. So when you talk about the sectors, whether you talk about financial, you talk about transportation, telecommunications, they all rely on one thing, and that's energy. And at the Department of Energy, we not only work, and again, Sean will talk about this, about how do we better secure the grid and work with the sector on that, but we also have the responsibility of protecting the bulk power for 34 states within the United States.
Again, a small portfolio, not much responsibility, but we're glad you're here to share your information and your background with us. Sean, you know, you really look at the energy portfolio nationally and somewhat globally from a different perspective from the security realm. So tell us about your role and how you work with Rocky and Adam and others to secure the information around the infrastructure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I work in the office called acronymed as CESR. So that's Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, right? And that office was stood up in DOE about a year and a half ago by then Secretary Rick Perry with the concept of focusing specifically on the security responsibilities, all threat, and the emergency response. So we took the ESF 12, so that's the FEMA emergency support functions, responders, brought that into our office. That's the ER piece, right? And so, for instance, right now we have a team of people in Puerto Rico assisting with the power recovery operations post earthquakes there. We have then the energy security and the cybersecurity piece. We are the Section 9 liaisons, right? So we're the representatives for the Department of Energy to Section 9 critical infrastructure entities. And then also we are the sector-specific agency, or SSA, as known under PPD 21. That's Presidential Policy Directive 21, that says we're responsible for the energy sector, right? So what we do is we run the coordinating councils with Adam and his people. We run programs. We develop research with the national labs, which then serve and transition over to the private sector for better security. And we really like to think about it not as a response function, but at CESR we really try to get to the preventative side, right? If you have an incident, you can call DHS and they have, you know, their hunt and incident response teams. We try to do the prevention in the resiliency piece, right? So how do you stay in operation if something happens, and how do you prevent things from happening altogether, right? Cyber is often thought of as an act of God, right? I got hit, and this act of God occurred. It could have happened on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. What we try to do is take that act of God thought out of it, because it is predictable, right? There are threat actors that want to get after certain critical infrastructure. They target specific things. How do we identify that and work with industry to prevent that from occurring?
That's really, you know, clearly the responsibility that each of you have in your roles is immense. The definition of risk really has changed over time, and there's different viewpoints of risk within organizations, both from a commercial perspective, from a public perspective, but that's kind of like IT/OT, is that definition of risk is merging and changing now as we include a more comprehensive view of them in understanding what risk is to an organization. Adam, could you tell us, you know, from your perspective, how has that risk analysis changed, and what is your role in particularly reporting to oversight organizations in understanding, including your board, what your risk profile looks like, and then how you do your risk, not necessarily how you do your risk, but how does the risk calculation come into the planning and execution of protecting the infrastructure you're responsible for?
Yeah, so the notion and ideas around security risk are the drivers for our last year of transformation and security at Dominion. So security, I think, typically for public utilities is a reactive business. Something happens, you react to it, you mitigate it, or try and figure it out, engage law enforcement or government or your regulators to try and solve whatever problem you're encountering. What we're trying to transition to, and we've partnered with McKinsey & Company at Dominion to build what really is more an enterprise defense model around security than corporate security or cybersecurity. So it integrates cybersecurity, physical security, and we developed a threat intelligence, director-led threat intelligence group that sort of knits the two together. And they all are co-located in a threat center in Richmond, Virginia, in our beautiful brand new tower in Richmond, Virginia. But thinking around ideas of risk, the conventional sort of intuitive notions of risk are your biggest, baddest revenue centers, your nuclear reactors, your SIP-14 sites, the things that if you look at your compliance standards, cascade in terms of importance to the grid through the cascading modeling. If something goes out here, then you lose the whole East Coast kind of thing, to the big dollar and revenue generating facilities. But over time, those targets have been so hardened through regulation, through compliance, through just the company's investment. You have walls 30 feet tall and 5 feet thick. Your networks are air gapped, or your data diodes are protecting around them and things. For us, coming out of government, and I'm thinking about the persistent threat. I'm thinking about crafty adversaries that are looking to get into our enterprise network. They are not going to go bang their heads against those 30-foot tall walls. They're going to look for vulnerabilities and exploit them. They're going to look for that wind farm out in the Palm Desert that produces 4 megawatts of power that is essentially a small brick building protected by a padlock to get access into our enterprise network in SCADA. That's what an adversary is going to exploit, not the hardest target. If you're a terrorist, you're not going to say, I'm going to go bomb the Pentagon. You're going to bomb a shopping mall, right? You're going to go where you can have the greatest impact with the least amount of risk of getting caught, the least amount of risk of being slowed down in your intentions. So what we've really tried to do is sensitize our leaders, sensitize our organization to really owning risk across the enterprise, security risk in addition to business risk. Every organization instills within its employees and its workforce ideas of you own business risk, right? If you're slowing down our operations, you're a problem for our company. Same too with security. If you're putting our company at risk through lazy cyber hygiene or through creating vulnerabilities by not properly configuring some protective application for us, then you are creating risk. The Wall Street Journal, if you have a breach in your network, the Wall Street Journal will not forgive you because it was in some low value piece of your network. You're still going to lose value, and that's the piece. That reputational risk around security is huge. The company's risk around penetrations into your network through vulnerable nodes is huge. And so trying to really bring that understanding, I think, to the C-suite and the board has been maybe some of the greatest value of the investment we've made over the last year.
That definition of risk is really important, and identifying the asymmetrical vulnerabilities across the enterprise is really important. Sean, how do you work with someone like Adam or his counterparts to address this asymmetrical threat through virtually any unsuspecting IP address that might be able to worm its way into one of your networks?
Right, so we think of risk as threat, vulnerability, and consequence, right? And from the threat side, you have an actor who has intent and has capability, right? And so let's take, for example, the Taliban, right? They have publicly declared to do things against the United States in the United States, but they don't really have a capability there. So you have a high intent, low capability. You take some other threat actors, they do have intent and capability, and we need to characterize that, right? And that's what we talk about when we're taking the act of God piece out of threat, right? They are predictable. You can get in front of it. And we do that through these reports called ARES reports. And that's analytical reasoning on the energy sector, or analytical reporting on the energy sector. And basically that's saying, what are these actors, what are their intent? And we put them at the unclassified level, right? So we do as much as we can to get them as releasable as possible, and then we share them and hold regular threat briefings with the ISACs, which is information sharing and advisory committees, and also with the coordinating councils, right? The sector coordinating councils, which Adam's team's on. And we get those out. So that hits the T part of it, right? The threat piece. On the vulnerability side, we have the Citrix and the Coyote program, which focusing on OT, right? Because energy sector, these are operational technology, industrial control systems. We take the supply chain, right? In energy, in the industrial control system community, there's not that many vendors. There really isn't. I mean, you have some major vendors that build really big equipment. It's not just-in-time inventory. It's not like you can go on Amazon and be like, give me a 200 megawatt transformer. They take months to years of advanced ordering and preparation for that supply chain. So we take that and we work with industry to identify what vulnerabilities might be inherently in those systems. And then we match that with intelligence community reporting at the classified levels and say, hey, how could this vulnerability be here and how could it impact you? But not thinking of it from this singular point attack. As Adam said, these adversaries are going to be patient. They're going to be strategic. So what we want to do is then say, how could these line up, right? How might a little bit of a vulnerability over here, a little bit of vulnerability over here might cascade, right? Because in cyber, it's not about the exact incident. It's about the second and third order supply chain, right? So if a vessel tips over in a ship channel and closes it, and now the liquid natural gas tanker can't get out that Dominion was selling to supply somewhere else, now you can't get the natural gas needed to generate the power. You've slowed the supply chain, so you're chipping away at America's superpower status, right? So how do we identify those things ahead of time with industry and say, hey, these are a different way to look at it? And then on the consequence side, so threat, vulnerability, and consequence. The consequence side, we have consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering, and that's it's called CCE. We love our acronyms. That's a new program that we've started with Idaho National Labs. You can go to Idaho National Labs, inl.gov, and you can find CCE on the website. And basically what that does is we've established training programs that we're moving around the country with industry and with government, trying to bring them together to say, if we have this, having this intelligence and knowing this system, how can we look at that supply chain and identify those critical second and third order effect points, right? So if we've characterized what the adversary does, we know vulnerabilities in the system, and then look at it strategically and identify how that would affect the supply chain, how that would affect U.S. military power, how would that affect the way of life of America, to say.
It's really impressive, the programmatic approach you take to that as a solutioning matrix. And working with Adam and his counterparts is really important in doing that. But equally so, at your own disposal, Rocky, you have some of the smartest people in the nation, in the world, working within the energy labs. Can you tell us how you work with Sean internally to really leverage the power of energy and the research that goes on within there to address some of these issues that Adam has to deal with?
No, absolutely. And it's interesting. We not only have smart people, we have a complex and we have tools to, like when we talk about SCADA test beds. So at Idaho, or out at PNNL has capabilities. Many of our labs have not just smart people, but we have facilities that allow us to test on real life grids, or real life, I always say networks because I think IT a lot of times, but real life kind of grid environments. So what we do is, first and foremost, research and development. OE and CESR, Office of Electricity, and CESR handle that. I think I talked earlier this week about AI, and I said we have producers and consumers. What's also interesting in the electricity space at DOE, we have producers of what is the next great thing to do in cybersecurity, whether it be OT or IT, and we have consumers that has the ability to not just buy a product from someone else, but go to the great researchers. So a lot of what we try to do, one is the basics, have regular meetings, what's going on. But really where we focus on is how do we create tools and how do we create an IT system that allows them to get the information they need, share the information they need, but also because we have PMAs, we have data. And how do we analyze that data, and how do we give that data to our researchers to help better identify ways to protect it, right? Because at the end of the day, we have sensors all over. Those sensors are providing data, and it's meaningless unless you can make information out of it. So what we do is we can gather that data, we can put it into, present it in a way that our researchers have access to it. We can anonymize in different ways, but so that we can better develop, or give them the opportunity to better develop or refine capabilities to create information out of that data.
So I want to jump on that perfect segue. So one of our major initiatives here in 2020 is the Cyber Analytics Tools and Techniques 2.0, right? So that's called CAT 2.0. Again, great acronym, right? We're real
I teed you up for this,
yeah.
right?
So what that is we're developing apps that sit on a enterprise platform backed up by a big data
BDP.
platform. Yeah,
Yep.
with BDP, acronym again.
Sorry.
So BDP is actually hosted, supported through Rocky's side of the house as the CIO, and then we work with industry and our labs, right, to develop unique capabilities that sit on that enterprise platform that Adam's team and other energy companies around the U.S. have access to run their data through it, or pull the app down so that they can run it on their own network. And it provides us behavioral characteristics and heuristics that sit on the data lake that then we can use to identify anomalous behavior, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, I'm getting signatures, I'm getting hashes that show malware, right? Ransomware, whatever. Those are known knowns. That's like, virus scan, that's bad. Well, if you find that in your network, you've already been hit. You're at your pass bang, your incident point and beyond. Again, we're trying to get in front of that. And when you think of advanced threat actors, they're not going to hit you with malware. They're not going to hit you with a virus or a ransomware. They may as a distraction, but what they're really going to do is change how your energy system works, right? If they're going to modify the PLCs, the programmable logic controllers at the lower level, the remote terminal units, they're going to change the programming on them, or change the order of operations of how they receive things, that then change the second and third order outcome of how the energy system operates, right? So if we can get that data, we can identify that when we know commands 1, 2, 3, 4 in order are a good set of commands, we can identify when anomalous behaviors being directed at, or it's operating in an anomalous state where it's going 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Or 1, 4, 3, 2, right? Those would be potential adversary changes in your network that you wouldn't identify as a malware type piece. That's which is the obvious piece, and say, oh, well, this isn't operating the right way, and maybe an adversary is changing the way that this system operates, and we were previously unaware of that. And so that's the big data platform is being hosted on Rocky's side, and then we're working with the labs to develop those capabilities to deliver them to Adam.
That really does talk about the marriage of IT and OT, right, and the criticality of understanding anomalous behavior. Well, in order to do that, you have visibility into what is normal behavior, right?
Right. Exactly.
So, Adam, you mentioned earlier this morning when we were talking, trying to stay left of bang, and you just said that again, Sean. So getting ahead of an event happening is really critical in the infrastructure, but it may not be the obvious outcome that we think that the adversary might be after. It may be an asymmetrical delay in delivery of capability that feeds a later capability, that you have this chain effect where the actual attack was back here, but the kinetic effect or the actual physical effect is way down here.
Which could be weeks.
Yeah, exactly. How do you deal with that? Do you share information? Do you get, if there's an event in one of your facilities, Adam, or out in another power producing organization out west, do you guys share that information? Is that channeled through DOE in any way? How do you guys deal with that?
Yeah, great question. So two points at the bottom line up front here. Never underestimate the tradecraft of APT adversaries. I recall back in my early days in the FBI's cyber division, I spent a couple of years in the FBI cyber division as a lawyer. I'm not a technologist, so don't ask me any questions about it. But I remember
You left off the end where you said, but I did stay at
At a
Park
Holiday Inn.
MGM.
yeah, that's right. But I did say the park. But I recall seeing their cases around things like counterfeit Cisco routers that were so close to the originals. The only way to really tell if they were counterfeit was by the serial numbers.
That's right.
So you can't underestimate the adversaries. Just because you're looking at your SIM and you're seeing your outer fence being hit 100,000 times a month by IPs resolving back to Russia or China or obvious proxies, Seychelles. Who knew? Seychelles, I'm getting hit by like 100,000 times a month. Because it looks loud and clumsy and noisy, and it's easy then to get lulled into this underestimating, our adversaries. Look at that, aren't we great? Yay, us. But what's lying in the source code of that OT environment, right? And if you have $400 million invested in certain OT equipment on the pipeline you're trying to build, for example, and then you find that supplier is now expanding business in Russia because there are sizable markets there they want to penetrate, right?
Or financed by.
Right. So you're cross-pollinating in with third-party vendors. You're cross-pollinating in with folks that do business regularly with adversaries of the United States. So that is the first major point. Don't underestimate the tradecraft. Right. Because of what you're seeing, don't let that define your context as you examine these issues. Secondly, don't underestimate the value of government back. So the relationships for you and your security organizations around cybersecurity and physical security, threat intelligence, the ingest of IOCs that we get from the ISACs, from the CRISP applications, from DOE Direct. I sit on the DHS Classified Intelligence Forum. My directors have TS clearances. That information, the minute I left government, I'm blind. I now don't see past the curtain unless the relationships give me that visibility. And if you don't have that visibility, you're not going to build the right use cases around the things that are going to have the greatest impact on you. The Iran threat, right? What are we seeing with Iran? Now the entire sector is turned on its head around Iran. Well, we've had the opportunity to study how do they weaponize industrial control systems in the areas where they've had kinetic attacks, where they've done things. The only way you're going to get that is through the intelligence community. The intelligence community is going to give you the tools and techniques used against systems in other parts of the world. You'll know it happened, but you're not going to know exactly how it happened unless you have those relationships and unless you have security workforce that's cleared to access it. So again, those relationships are, I think, to stay left a boom for us. That's the only way, is working real time, working collaboratively, participating in everything we can. I mean, it's easy for us to say, and I get this in many audiences, right? The proprietary vulnerability for us as a regulated monopoly utility, it's easier, frankly, than we interface with customers through billing, and that's all third party anyway. I mean, the reality is for us, it's about keeping the lights on. That's what Dominion Energy is about. So those relationships are much more transparent, much more real time, much more deeply engaged than I think a lot of other companies whose entire business is based on their trade secrets and the things that they develop. But it's still, I think the point still has to be made. I know as we built out our threat center, as we integrated a lot of our security functionality, one of our principal benchmarks was Citibank up in New York. Citibank kind of leads the sector, I think. I don't want to offend anybody if there's anybody from the finance sector who thinks otherwise, but at least for us, because they've almost fully integrated their cyber, physical, fraud, all of their security so that they could crosswalk any of the kind of vulnerabilities and threats and gaps that keep them up at night in their company. And so we really wanted to replicate that. And there are a lot of best practices we pulled out of that and we're using now in our threat center from studying that. So that staying predictive with government, staying proactive with managing threat information and crosswalking it across everything, trying to think how a threat actor would exploit our vulnerabilities. That's how we try to stay left of boom. And on the governance piece, because I got to highlight this, how your security organization is managed. If your security organization is managed by your general counsel's office, your security organization is managed by the business organizations, that's going to slow you down and make it so hard for you to have a meaningful impact on those vulnerabilities left of boom.
You know, Adam, you really make a good point on the analogy to the financial sector and the maturity that they have in looking at this type of a threat and how they mitigate that and avoid it left of boom as much as possible. But you guys have a different element. You've got a physical delivery model that they don't have to deal with.
That's right.
You actually have plants. You actually have, you know, distribution towers and power lines and all these different points of attack. So Adam and Rocky, how do you guys look at it and leverage what energy can provide that adds that extra dimension that some of the other sectors don't really have to deal with?
So from the terms of physical and cyber, and I guess I'm missing it a little bit here, but from the terms
IT/OT.
Yeah, the IT/OT. You know, we look at it a number of different ways. I mean, you've got the IT side, the OT side. How do they mesh together? How do you worry about that? But you know, kind of the physical plant side. How do you have we talk about insider threat, right? And that's, I think, an area that becomes big for all of us, is in the insider threat vector. Because it's not just, you know, if you have physical access to something, you can get into it. I think what I always worry about, and you might know better, if you have substations all over the country that are literally in neighborhoods. And it's not hard to just, I mean, there's some physical barriers, but a determined threat actor will just get right into there. You also look at when you talk about distribution, you talk about renewables, and now you have, you're producing energy all over. There's two parts to that too. One, it's more to protect, but two, you also have dispersed generation, which can be a benefit in itself. So, and we look at it in a lot of different ways. I'm not sure I've totally kind of hit your question, but there's a number of things that we do look at. There's a number of things that we try to provide through Sean's organization of the advice to folks. When we talk about our PMAs, we do think about kind of a physical security perspective. A lot of it comes down to monitoring. You know, when we talk about BDP, how are we pulling information in, and kind of sensor data, and everything's a sensor now, so we can provide data and we get the information we need to help protect it better.
I want to actually, two things. One is the CESR, the office in DOE, we sponsor the clearances for the private sector, and we sponsor them up through the TS level, right? And so that's a little bit different than other elements in the government, right? At DHS, they sponsor through the secret level, which is great. I mean, they're serving such a broad community. We're serving energy where the threat is a little bit different. We sponsor all the way through the top secret level. So that helps us, one. But two, I wanted to actually pivot that a little bit and talk about how we work with industry in exercises, right? So one of our initiatives this year is we're having our exercise branch, our emergency response side, do a study of how do we bring cyber into the ICS framework, right? So the incident command structure. How do we bring cyber into that so that when you have an incident, you're understanding your cyber security posture, right? You stand up an incident command post. You may have a physical security people there, but how are you also looking at it from the cyber perspective? When you run an exercise and you know that we coop here, which from DOE perspective, Rocky and I work extensively on. If we're cooping here, does that put us at different cyber vulnerability that we weren't exactly thinking about? And we run these GridX, GridSecCon, all these different exercises throughout the year with industry to try to identify those different elements, right? And we're going to commission a study this year of how do we look at cyber in that aspect, right? How does cyber fit into the ICS That's something we learned through Hurricane Harvey, right? When Houston got flooded, many people had their data centers who had their security posture. It's like, well, our cyber's in the cloud, so if we coop over here and stand that up, we'll still have our cyber posture because that's in the cloud. Well, the cloud is that data center in Houston that's shutting down because it's going underwater. And we encountered that. We working with private industry, we saw where that was happening to people because you may not realize that your data center is also in an element that's vulnerable, right? Due to natural disaster, right? Or in the wake of a natural disaster, maybe your guard should be higher, right? Because adversaries are doing things in the they're testing things in your infrastructure in the wake of the natural disaster. Because you're focused this way, you have all your crisis teams out over here. They can test something over here and it breaks, and you're like, oh, well, that just happened because of the natural disaster.
Yeah, many times people shortcut some processes in an emergency that they might not do otherwise that create vulnerabilities.
That's right.
The air gap.
Exactly.
The air gap, right.
The CES government is, put on by the Government Business Executive Forum. So how can our business partners who are in the audience help you with what you're really trying to achieve? So if each of you could just take a few minutes and say, what are you doing? How can industry help you? And then how can they get to you to make that happen? Adam, you want to start off with that?
As we try and think around the third-party vulnerabilities and the companies that we do business with, the degree to which our vendors can demonstrate to us that they have effective security controls, that they have an understanding of their own insider threat posture, that they have the cyber hygiene and cyber practices that we would impose upon ourselves if we were doing the kind of work our vendors are doing. That would quicken our process a lot, and that would make doing business with you a lot more appealing, the degree to which you can demonstrate that to us. We are going to be implementing with our supply chain. We have a VP-led supply chain organization within Dominion. I think at last count we have something near 40,000 vendors at Dominion. Not all vendors are created equal. I mean, if you're supplying the cups at the coffee station, that's a whole lot different than the folks that are building our nuclear reactors. But at the end of the day, we have to have some kind of a vetting process, and that vetting process ought to be collaborative with the third parties that we're doing business with. And what that process is going to look like is evolving over time. Wanted to say a quick thing on insider threat. We talked around that. That is such a crucial piece for us. So just to give you an idea, and there's probably a learning point here for somebody in the audience, maybe more than one of you, but we recently, in our acquisition of the South Carolina utility, formerly SCANA, now Southeast Energy Group within Dominion, it was a really good process, I thought, very efficiently led process of M&A for Dominion. But with that, along with that, like frequently happens in those situations, we had a voluntary retirement program because we're finding synergies. The workforce has to reduce for it to be a value proposition for us. But with that, you have a whole host of our legacy employees, folks who are extremely loyal to Dominion, red, white, and blue. They've been doing it in the organization for 30 years, and those folks are leaving, and they're using the retirement program to get a nice check on the way out. Well, they're getting replaced within the organization by a whole new generation of people, and they're not the same kinds of mindsets arriving at the door as the ones who are leaving. And carbon producing utility, a very robust gas business. We're trying to build pipelines. We have adversaries domestically who want to ensure we're not able to do that. The folks who are most animated around that are folks in large universities. We draw from a particular elite university, probably disproportionately in the state of Virginia, I won't name it, but that's where our most active adversarial forces are within that university for our pipeline build across the Blue Ridge Mountains at the moment. So who are the folks coming in? How are they motivated? Are they coming in with maybe a plan of disrupting our operations? Do they not necessarily believe in the core values of Dominion Energy? Do they not necessarily join us in the mission of providing safe, reliable, affordable energy to government and our customers. So, those kinds of things keep me up at night because between dual sit foreign nationals that work in our workforce at the PhD level and have been there, once they are a member of the family, they're protected by employment laws that make sort of insider threat programs surrounding loyalty and that sort of thing very, very difficult. So these are the kinds of things we're thinking around insider threat, and it's really a challenging discipline within security. Anyway, I wanted to throw that out there.
No, I agree, and thanks for sharing that. Rocky, how can industry help you?
Well, there's a number of ways. First, we need to tell you, or I need to tell you what I'm trying to solve, right? We talked about BDP. We are gathering information, we are gathering data points from all over our networks, from all over, whether it's OT or IT. We have this data coming in. So I need help of how do we structure that data? So I'll be database help, right? We know how to do it, but are there ways to do it better? Are there ways to do it more efficiently? I need help with that, right? If you have a solution that says, here's how you can take disparate data and put it into a nice structured environment, that's great. I'll tell you right now, we're using Splunk, it's great, but if you've got people that know how to use Splunk or manipulate Splunk, that'd be fantastic. We also need help with, and then once you have the data, how do you analyze the data? So if you have data analysis capabilities, especially around, and it's great, you have a base capability of data analysis, but understanding the industry helps you analyze it better. So for us, we need the IT help, right? But then there's OT too. That's much newer in this environment. So if you come to me and say, I can do data analysis because I have someone that looked at an Excel spreadsheet once and figured out that I could save $5, great, good for you. What I really need is someone to say, I can look at data from all over, I know how to structure it, we know how to kind of get it labeled so that we can do real data analysis. We can start identifying capabilities where if it is not 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, having that critical thinking ability. So we need smart people that understand kind of our business. So those are some of the problems I'm trying to solve. So if you're in industry and you have that, that's what we need. I would be remiss, Department of Energy, we want to be the premier leader in artificial intelligence. If you have thoughts and ideas about how to use AI or tools that kind of use AI to help us better identify anomalies, I think that's something we would be interested in too. So how can you help? Those are the big problems. I've got a ton of data. How do I better organize that and make sure we have people who have access to it? And now people that can analyze that data, that understand and have context so that they know the right question to ask. And then advanced capabilities around AI are things that we're always interested in. So those would be the three ways. And then, of course, because we're government, at a good value proposition. But those are areas we need help. And we have a great team helping us right now. But that doesn't mean there's not another great idea out there. There's not somebody who can really help us with something else.
Thanks. Sean,
Yes.
big portfolio, super complex. How can industry help you?
Two things. We're going to boil it down. So the cybersecurity workforce, we know, is over a 300,000 person gap, right? If we look at that cybersecurity workforce gap, the majority of that is focused on IT systems. We do not have a robust capacity of industrial control system capable cybersecurity engineers, right? Anything we can do to get our hands on more ICS-focused cybersecurity engineers. A lot of times, we'll say we need somebody that does cybersecurity. They're like, oh, great, I got my IT guy. I'm like, right. That's not your IT guy. It's not the guy. I'm looking for the OT ICS expert. That's what we focus on here. The other piece is understanding the role of DOE. DOE is not a regulator. at all. We don't have a regulatory capacity at all. NERC-FERC has a regulatory capacity. That's not DOE, right? And people don't understand that. They think a lot of times, oh, DOE, the government, if I work with them, they'll regulate me, or they'll fine me or whatever. We don't do that. It's not even possible, right? Like by law. So just understanding that we want to work with you on the opposite side, and we're not a regulator. So
Awesome. All right, we've got time for a couple of questions. If anyone in the audience has a question for our group, just like previous panels, it's really hard to see anyone beyond this very first row. So you got to,
Yes, sir.
yeah, please.
How much is your budget, and what percentage are you using in terms of budget to manage cybersecurity, threat? So the question is, you have a budget. How big is that budget, or how big of a percentage of your budget is cybersecurity, cyber response,
Sure.
monitoring, building these processes, all that defense stuff? And then the follow-up question would be, if it was your money, right, and you had to manage that organization, would you be spending all that on defense, or would you carve out a little piece to go offensive?
Okay, I'll touch that one. First, we do not have Title 10 authority. We do not do offensive operations at the Department of Energy. That's the easy one to answer. We talk about budget for, so 100% of our budget in cybersecurity will be defensive. We spend, if you look at my appropriated budget, a little over 50% is for cybersecurity in the CIO's office. When you look across the department, I think it skews a little bit because we talk about a $2 billion IT portfolio spend, and we're not even talking on the OT side.
Yep.
A lot of that is for large supercomputers. If you spend, I don't know the full numbers here, but $10 million or $100 million on Summit, you're just going to skew that number. So it's not 50% across the department. I think we're probably, I won't say the public number, but when you look at my budget as a CIO, it's about 50%. That's easy. I think, Sean, you'd probably be in about the 90% because that's your mission.
Cyber-wise, yeah. And I'll tell you, publicly, we awarded $37 million last year in research and development in cybersecurity, right? So looking at new ways to do engineering in the ICS space, and new ways to provide that security. We did $37 million in R&D awards last year. So half of my organization is on the R&D side, and the other half is on the security and emergency response side.
So Adam, I hope you're not doing offensive operations in cyber.
Not yet, but no. So
You don't have Title 10, 50, or 13.
It's funny. Moving out of government, we were chatting in the back about this. My whole life spent in government, and now I'm learning this awful concept of depreciation costs. Watch it kind of go like this. But for us, it's a little different, private sector, because I have cyber risk compliance and then the SIM. So I'm something like a CISO. But what I do is basically, here's a capability, and then I hand it over to the CIO to implement and build and architect. So a little different than a whole lot of the other work that we do, or if we expand an OT environment and things like that, we can also build a business organization for some of that if we're protecting one of their new facilities or something like that. So it's a little different. But I do know from benchmarking with sector partners, and we do a lot of that in the monopoly space, right? Because we can talk, and we really do partner probably much more robustly than companies that have a competitive facing relationship. But we are more heavily invested than many, if not most, if not all of our peers on security, I think by virtue of who our customers are. And then also the things that we're doing out on the edge innovation. I mean, we're building a wind farm 30 miles offshore of Virginia Beach, and we're doing that right now. We're building new pipelines. We're building methane capture innovation around animal agriculture and putting methane captured off a pig farm into our gas pipelines. We're doing that right now. So there's a whole lot of edge innovation that our vendors, that our engineers in-house, have worked very hard to develop, and so we're protecting that as well. And I think we're doing more of that than a lot of our industry peers. But we're heavily invested. From my benchmarking activities, I don't want to say a number, but we're out there in front, I think.
So we could go on, and I would love to, but unfortunately we're out of time. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being a part of the panel this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.